Imagine a mailbox on a quiet street corner, ordinary, blue, and unremarkable. But every letter placed inside vanishes, no matter the address or stamps. For years, it was a local joke until something replied. Not a letter but a whisper message received. That whisper turned a harmless oddity into a chilling legend. This is the story of Havenwood's haunted mailbox. We'll explore the facts, the whispers, and the darkness behind a simple object, and ask who or what is listening on the other end. Havenwood, a peaceful Midwest town where life was simple and predictable. The blue mailbox on Elm Street was just part of the scenery. But then, mail started vanishing. Birthday cards, bills, invitations. Complaints piled up, but no one could explain it. The box was inspected, found normal, and put back. Yet the silence around it grew, unsettling the town. Havenwood's order was about to be shattered. The mailbox's reputation spread, first as a joke, then as a dare. Kids wrote letters to ghosts and aliens, laughing as they vanished, but the evidence was real. Mail disappeared, never to return. The first whispered reply changed everything. Fear replaced curiosity. The box became a thing to avoid. The town's harmless legend had become a source of dread. Someone, or something, was answering back. Carol Miller, a retired teacher, noticed her grandson's birthday card never arrived. She tested the mailbox, sending a letter to herself. It vanished too. Friends tried, and their mail disappeared as well. The dead box became a neighborhood mystery. The mail carrier found it empty, even when residents swore they'd just used it. Carol's persistence turned a personal loss into a town-wide puzzle. The mailbox was swallowing messages, offering only silence. The legend was growing. Stories multiplied. Wedding invitations, checks, important documents all vanished. The post office investigated, found nothing wrong, and posted a vague warning. The box became a pariah. People crossed the street to avoid it. Mail trucks slowed, drivers wary. Each lost letter deepened the mystery. Havenwood faced a chilling truth. Things dropped in that box simply ceased to exist. No one could explain why. Not everyone believed the legend. Science teacher David Chen led a group to test the box with trackers and noisemakers. They watched as the GPS signal vanished. No movement, just gone. The beeping stopped, silence swallowing everything. The crowd gasped. Skepticism turned to fear. The experiment proved the impossible. The mailbox defied logic. The legend was real, and the town could no longer deny it. David Chen's failed experiment was the turning point. When the town's most outspoken skeptic was left speechless, holding a phone with a dead signal, the story exploded. It was no longer a rumor whispered over backyard fences. It was a confirmed, witnessed event. The story of the vanishing GPS tracker and the silenced beeper spread through Havenwood like wildfire. The local newspaper, which had previously ignored the story as silly gossip, now ran a front-page article with the headline, "Elm Street Mailbox Baffles Experts." The legend was no longer just local folklore, it was becoming news. The mailbox was now famous, or rather, infamous. The technical difficulty sign was ripped down, likely taken as a souvenir. It was replaced by something far more ominous. Someone had spray-painted a single stark question mark on its side in black paint. The box was no longer just an object of fear, it was an object of fascination. People started driving in from neighboring towns just to see it. Teenagers would pose for photos in front of it, treating it like a macabre tourist attraction. They would dare each other to touch it, to stick their hands inside the mail slot, pulling them back with a nervous laugh. The town's relationship with the object became deeply complicated. On one hand, there was a palpable fear. Parents forbade their children from going anywhere near that corner. The few elderly residents who lived on that block began walking the long way around to avoid it. But on the other hand, there was an undeniable curiosity, a human pull towards the unknown. The mailbox represented a crack in the mundane reality of their lives. It was a genuine, unsolvable mystery right in their own backyard. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also profoundly compelling. What was it? Where did the letters go? This was how the legend of the vanishing letters was truly born. It was cemented in the town's collective consciousness, a shared story built on dozens of missing letters and one failed scientific experiment. The mailbox ceased to be a piece of postal infrastructure and became a monument to the inexplicable. It stood there, silent and blue, guarding its impossible secret. The people of Havenwood had learned that anything put inside would disappear forever. They accepted this as the fundamental rule. They had no way of knowing that the rule was about to be broken, and that the silence they had grown accustomed to was about to be shattered by a voice from the void. The Havenwood mailbox became an online phenomenon, reaching Julian Croft, a disgraced journalist turned podcaster. He chased stories mainstream media wouldn't touch, and the tale of the mail-eating mailbox was perfect. Julian arrived in Havenwood. He interviewed residents like Carol Miller and David Chen, recording every detail. This wasn't just a story, it was a challenge, a mystery he couldn't ignore. He watched the mailbox, his investigation becoming an obsession. Julian's days in Havenwood fell into a strange, repetitive rhythm. Mornings were for research. He'd spend hours in the dusty archives of the local library, digging through old town records and decades of the Havenwood Gazette. He was looking for patterns, for any other strange occurrences that might have happened near that specific location. He searched for reports of missing persons, unexplained power outages, geological anomalies, anything. He found nothing out of the ordinary, just the quiet, predictable history of a sleepy town. The mailbox seemed to be an island of pure weirdness in a sea of absolute normalcy, which only made it more fascinating to him. His afternoons were for interviews. He became a familiar, if slightly unsettling, fixture in town. People started to recognize the tired-looking man with the notebook who asked endless questions. He wasn't just gathering facts anymore, he was documenting the psychological impact of the mailbox on the community. He noted how residents would change their walking routes, how their voices would drop to a whisper when talking about the box, how a simple piece of postal equipment had managed to cast a long, dark shadow over their collective psyche. He was charting the geography of fear, and the epicenter was that unassuming blue container. But his nights were for the mailbox itself. After the sun went down and the streets of Havenwood grew quiet, Julian would park his car a block away and just watch. He sat there for hours, nursing lukewarm coffee from a thermos, his audio recorder placed on the dashboard, hoping to catch a stray sound, a faint hum, anything. He was a fisherman casting his line into an ocean of silence, waiting for a bite. He felt the cold spot that people talked about. He saw how animals, stray cats and neighborhood dogs, would give the corner a wide berth, their instincts screaming at them to stay away from something he couldn't see. The deeper Julian dug, the more the mystery consumed him. His podcast was momentarily forgotten. His notes became more frantic, filled with speculative theories and manic diagrams connecting unrelated events. He was falling down the rabbit hole, and he knew it. He had been here before. That same intoxicating blend of discovery and dread, the feeling of being on the cusp of something enormous, something no one else could see. The mailbox was no longer a story he was covering, it was a story he was becoming a part of. And his growing obsession was beginning to feed the phenomenon itself. Julian's presence in Havenwood had a polarizing effect on the tense community. For some, he was a welcome figure, a sign their ordeal was being taken seriously. They eagerly shared their stories, hoping he could find answers. To them, he was brave enough to stare into the abyss. But for others, Julian was an unwelcome guest, stirring up fear for his own gain. They shot him suspicious glances. He was an agitator, picking at a wound they just wanted to heal. The division created a new layer of tension in Havenwood. The town was on edge because of the supernatural mailbox. His investigation had become part of the experiment. After weeks of observation, Julian made a decision. Passive surveillance wasn't enough. The mailbox remained silent. He concluded it reacted to things being put inside. To get a response, he had to provide a new stimulus. He had to send it a message. He settled on 3 questions. What are you? Where do the letters go? What do you want? As dusk settled, Julian walked to the corner of Elm and 2nd. He pushed the letter inside. Then a sound from the box itself. And then, a voice. A whisper. The first reply. The whispered words hung in the cold night air, sending terror through Julian. He froze. It was real. A dry voice scraped out of the mailbox. He stood paralyzed. The silence was terrifying. He had crossed a line. Fighting the urge to flee, Julian forced himself to move. He walked back to his car, got inside, and locked the doors. He grabbed his recorder. He had to document this. This was important. It was a direct response. This was a conversation. He had asked a question, and the void had answered. He couldn't leave. He had to see this through. He settled in for the night. The vigil had begun. He was now a participant. As the hours crept by, the initial shock began to subside, replaced by a tense, hyper-aware vigilance. Every rustle of leaves, every distant dog bark, every passing car sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through Julian's system. He sat perfectly still, his recorder capturing the oppressive silence, his notebook open on the passenger seat, though his hands were too unsteady to write. The world outside his car seemed to shrink until only he and the mailbox existed, locked in a silent standoff. He felt like a soldier in a trench, waiting for an enemy he couldn't see to make its next move. The waiting was its own form of psychological torture. The town of Havenwood went to sleep around him. Lights in the nearby houses blinked out one by one, plunging the street into a deeper, more profound darkness. The only illumination came from the single buzzing streetlight that cast a sickly yellow cone of light onto the corner, making the blue mailbox look almost black. The ordinary street corner had transformed into a stage, and Julian had the unnerving feeling that he was the sole audience member for a play that was about to take a very dark turn. The sense of isolation was absolute. He was utterly alone with the thing that whispered from the void. He started noticing small, subtle changes in the environment around the mailbox. The air inside his car, despite the heater being off, seemed to be growing colder. A thin layer of condensation, like frozen breath, began to form on the inside of his windshield, obscuring his view. He wiped it away with his sleeve, his skin prickling with goosebumps. He glanced at the car's external temperature gauge. It read 38 degrees Fahrenheit, far colder than the night's forecast. The cold wasn't just in the air, it felt like it was radiating from the mailbox itself, a palpable aura of unnatural chill. Then came the sounds. They were faint at first, easily dismissed as the wind or the settling of old metal, but they grew more distinct. A soft scratching from within the box like fingernails on steel. A low, guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath his car. Julian leaned forward, straining to hear, his recorder pointed directly at the source. These were not normal sounds. They were organic, alive. The mailbox, which had stood silent for so long, was beginning to stir. The clock on his dashboard ticked past midnight. The shift had begun, and the chilling night was just getting started. As midnight bled into morning, the strange phenomena escalated. The humming intensified into a low-frequency drone. The temperature dropped, and Julian could see his breath inside his car. Frost formed on the mailbox, defying the autumn weather. The streetlight above the mailbox started to flicker violently, plunging the corner into darkness. Fear became overwhelming, a heavy weight on his chest. But the journalist in him craved answers, and kept him pinned, waiting for the night's final card. The humming stopped. The silence was jarring. The streetlight went out, plunging the street into blackness. Then he heard a tearing noise from the mailbox. He pointed the flashlight. The mailbox was contorting, the mail slot stretching into a gaping maw. Reality seemed to be fraying. The humming returned, deeper, and black smoke curled out from the hole. The box was opening, preparing to send a reply. Julian was the recipient. As the impossible unfolded, the weather turned violent. Thunder shook his car. The sky opened. A wall of water slammed the windshield. The world dissolved. The storm felt orchestrated. Wind tore at the trees. He could just make out the mailbox, a grotesque silhouette. It was pure chaos. Julian was numb, trapped in a nightmare. His attention stayed locked on the contorted blue box. It seemed to command the elements, and Julian could do nothing but watch. It was preparing a terrifying answer, using the storm as its herald. Through the storm, the sound from the mailbox changed. A soft, inviting hiss slithered through the chaos. It sounded like a whisper, promising secrets, the audio equivalent of a beckoning finger. The void was calling to him. He felt a strange, inexplicable pull. The whisper promised to answer his questions. Black, smoky vapors poured from the opening, forming a writhing cloud of shadow, creating a hole in reality itself. The hissing grew louder, more persuasive. The temptation was becoming unbearable. All he had to do was open the door. His hand drifted towards the door handle. He was losing the battle against his own obsession. Just as his fingers brushed the door handle, the hissing stopped. The sudden silence snapped Julian out of his trance. He yanked his hand back, terrified. The storm raged, but the seductive sound was gone, replaced by an expectant stillness from the mailbox. He was alone, facing an entity that could whisper into his soul. This was about survival. Then, a voice, the same voice, but different, inside his car, everywhere. It whispered a single, chilling word. Sender. It was the origin point, the one who sent the messages. Julian had gotten its attention by trying to return a letter. The single word sender shattered Julian Croft's psyche. The revelation was too vast, too terrifying for his mind to contain. It was an answer that created a million more horrifying questions. What was being sent? To where? And for what purpose? The entire phenomenon was flipped on its head. The mailbox wasn't a black hole that consumed things, it was a loading dock. The missing letters, the GPS tracker, the quiet hopes and dreams of the people of Havenwood, they were all just packages. And he had just spoken to the being in charge of shipping. The fear was so absolute it turned into a kind of horrifying clarity. That clarity broke his paralysis. The instinct for self-preservation, long suppressed by his obsessive need for answers, came roaring back to life with the force of a tidal wave. He didn't think, he just acted. His hand shot to the ignition, his fingers turning the key with a frantic, desperate energy. The engine roared to life, its familiar mechanical sound a comforting anchor in the swirling chaos of the supernatural. He slammed the car into reverse, his foot stomping on the accelerator. The tires squealed on the wet pavement, the car lurching backward away from the monstrous corner. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He wrenched the steering wheel, throwing the car into a wild, uncontrolled turn, and then floored it, speeding down the dark, rain-swept street. He drove with a singular blind panic, his only goal to put as much distance as possible between himself and the corner of Elm and 2nd. The storm raged, lightning splitting the sky behind him, but he didn't notice. His entire world had been reduced to the narrow, rain-slicked ribbon of asphalt in his headlights. He left his notebook, his thermos, and his courage behind him on that street. The only thing he took with him was the echo of that one terrible word. He didn't stop until the sun came up, finding himself in a different county, parked at a deserted gas station, the car's engine still ticking as it cooled. The storm was gone. The sky was a pale, washed-out gray. He was shaking uncontrollably, his clothes damp with a mixture of rain and cold sweat. He had survived the night. He had his answer, but it was an answer that offered no comfort, no resolution. It was a piece of knowledge that would haunt him forever. He had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had whispered its job title. Message received, message understood. His investigation was over. His haunting was just beginning. By dawn the storm was gone. The only evidence was fallen leaves. The journalist was gone. The mailbox looked normal. Inside a single, plain white envelope. It was the letter Julian had sent, returned to sender. The town of Havenwood was left with a deep scar, a shared memory. The scar remained a silent reminder of the impossible. Julian Croft was never seen in Havenwood again. He drove away that morning and never looked back. But the town's mystery never left him. He was a changed man, haunted. He abandoned his podcast, sold his equipment, and cut off contact with everyone. He lives a life of isolation now, a ghost in his own life. He is haunted by the sound of tearing metal and a voice that was not a voice. He sees a simple blue mailbox and feels a jolt of primal terror. His digital audio recorder was the only piece of evidence he kept. He never listened to it. It sits there to this day, containing the sounds of a supernatural storm. Julian Croft's obsession led him to the truth, but the truth offered only a life sentence of fear. The story of the Havenwood mailbox did not die with Julian's departure. In fact, his sudden disappearance only added another layer of mystery to the legend. To the townspeople, he became a part of the story, another victim consumed by the box's strange power. The tale evolved. It was no longer just about vanishing letters. It was about the obsessive outsider who came seeking answers and was driven away, or worse, by what he found. His frantic, panicked flight from town became the chilling final chapter in Havenwood's local horror story, a cautionary tale about the dangers of digging too deep. Years passed. The mailbox on Elm and 2nd continued to function like any other. A new generation of kids grew up in Havenwood, kids who had never experienced the phenomenon firsthand. For them, the story was just that, a story. It was the town's local monster, their own version of the boogeyman. They would tell it around campfires, trying to scare each other, embellishing the details with every retelling. The warped metal, the ghostly whispers, the terrified journalist. It all became a part of a grand, spooky narrative, its roots in truth slowly being obscured by the vines of folklore. The legend, however, found a new life outside of Havenwood. Though Julian never published his findings, the story leaked out. Whispers on internet forums pieced together from his earlier interviews and the accounts of the townspeople formed a compelling narrative of true weirdness. It became a cult classic among paranormal enthusiasts and investigators of the unexplained. It was a perfect mystery. It had a specific location, multiple witnesses, a failed scientific experiment, and a dramatic, unresolved climax involving a vanished investigator. The mailbox that sends nowhere became a destination for a new kind of pilgrim. These new visitors armed with cameras and EMF meters would come to Havenwood looking for a thrill. They would take pictures of the now infamous mailbox, try to record EVPs and post their investigations online. They found nothing. The box remained silent, its power seemingly dormant or perhaps satisfied. The legend was now solidified, trapped in amber. It was a story of a phenomenon that had come, terrified a community, and then simply stopped. The mailbox sits there today, a silent monument not to what it is, but to what it once was, a brief, terrifying connection to a place we were never meant to know exists. So what are we left with? We have a story that defies all rational explanation. A story of vanishing letters, a failed experiment, and a terrified journalist who flew too close to the sun. We have the tangible accounts of an entire town, and the psychological scars left behind. Was it mass hysteria? A series of bizarre coincidences that spiraled into a shared delusion? Or did Julian Croft, in his obsessive quest, truly make contact with an entity beyond our comprehension? An entity that called itself the Sender, a cosmic courier using an ordinary mailbox as its collection point. The evidence is gone, and only the chilling legend remains. The mailbox on Elm Street stands as a testament to the idea that the world we see is not the only world there is. It suggests that there are thin places, cracks in the fabric of our reality, where the ordinary can become extraordinary, and the mundane can become monstrous. For a few years, one of those thin places was a standard blue USPS collection box in a sleepy Midwestern town. It served as a reminder that we are surrounded by systems and mechanics far grander and more terrifying than we can possibly imagine, operating just outside our field of vision, following rules we will never understand. The story serves as a profound warning, a warning against obsession, against the kind of pride that drives a person to demand answers from the void. Julian Croft got his answer and it destroyed him. He learned that some knowledge is a burden too heavy for the human mind to carry. The entity in the mailbox was not malevolent. It wasn't a monster. It was just doing its job. And when Julian interfered, when he tried to return a message to its point of origin, it simply corrected the error, provided the requested information, and closed the channel. The most terrifying things in the universe may not be the things that hate us, but the things that don't even notice we are here. And so, the blue box sits on its quiet corner, an object with a terrifying history, waiting. The connection may be dormant, but is it truly gone? The story leaves us with one final, chilling thought, an inescapable question that lingers long after the facts have been presented. We've explored what happened when the people of Havenwood sent their messages. We've seen what happened when an investigator demanded a reply, but it makes you wonder, as you seal your own envelopes and search for a place to mail them, what happens if you send your own message?